Hello and welcome to the Rusted Brush. Today we're going to be doing a different kind of video than I normally do. This is going to be on Mordheim, and this is a tier list for the rating of 1A warbands. So these are the warband ratings right here. This is for these specific ones that I'm showing. It's called 1A on the Broheim website. There's also 1B and 1C, and I'll be doing these later on. I'll do separate videos on those. By the way, this is the Broheim website. This is a super useful video for this is a super useful website for Mordheim. This is where you can get like all the rules and everything, and even like the narrative stuff, and like separate campaigns outside of the base rulebook, basically. So yeah, this is a super useful website for that. And yeah, this video is hopefully to get an idea, give you an idea how the warbands play, what they're like, how good they are, which ones you might want to avoid, that kind of thing. So about the rankings, so A, this is going to be Apex Predators. This is going to be strong, flavorful, consistently effective, very dominating warbands. B is for like dominant forces, but they have some counterplay to them, basically. Like they're very strong, but either maybe their early game is a little bit lacking, or there's some small counterplay to them, basically, where they're just not the best. Battle Hardened is for like reliable forces that are decent, well-rounded, solid campaign performers, but they still have some issues, but like are okay. Not even better than okay, I guess. Scrappers are basically, they can do well, but they require like some skill, luck, or effort, essentially. Strugglers, like the name suggests, they struggle. They're noticeably like weaker. F for Doomed, fundamentally flawed, outmatched, and they can have a weak narrative or visual that ties them to Mordheim. And then G is for Curse Picks. Basically, they're broken, they need a rework, or they just don't fit at all the flavor of Mordheim. And they can be broken in a good way, where they're like extremely overpowered and like just broken in that sense, or that they don't play well at all and like they're terrible. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. Some things to keep in mind before I start rating things. This is my opinion. You can have your own opinion. You may not like where I put things. You might disagree. Feel free to comment down below and we can have a discussion about that, basically. This is meant to help newer players basically get an idea of where these warbands sit. Also, we're going to keep in mind optional rules like the black powder rules, the mounted stuff. The mounted stuff specifically, I'm not going to talk too much about because normally you don't run mounted stuff, but I think we're going to get into that in a separate video, more or less. But the black powder weapon is one that will come up and I'll talk about with warbands, how that can affect it. We're also going to be looking at them from a campaign perspective and not one-off games, because that would skew some of them really differently, because one-off game, it's just one game and that's it, basically. Yeah. Also, yeah, like I said before, though, this is just my opinion, so, take that as you will. I've played a lot of games. I've had almost 7-ish years of playing this game. Very recently, basically, of 5 years, I've done 7 campaigns, I think. So I play this game a lot. So keep that in mind, I guess, but also there might be some confirmation bias with what I've seen, what I play, but we're not taking into account any house rulings or anything like that. But I do suggest that you do some house ruling of this game. But I want to say that for another video discussing what changes I made when I play my games, but we're not going to be taking that into account when we talk about these factions today. Alright, so to start off, I'm going to be starting with the Mordheim rulebooks, the ones that came from the rulebooks, and we're going to start with, I think, the most generic and the easiest to start with faction, and that's the Human Mercenaries. So this includes Reichland, Middenheim, and Marienburg, and essentially they have the same like list of equipment and people that they can hire. The only differences are the small special roles. So basically, they start with 5 heroes. They get the Mercenary Captain, 2 Champions, and 2 Youngbloods. Mercenary Captain is pretty solid with Weapon Skill 4, Ballistic Skill 4, and Leadership 8. Nothing really to sneeze at. generally we're going to be using these heroes as kind of like a guideline for later on. Same with like the warrior henchmen. We're going to be using them and comparing them to the rest of like the warbands and how effective cost-wise are they. So yeah. And champions, 35 gold for weapon skill 4. And then we have young bloods, which are weapon skill 2, ballistic skill 2, but then generic human strength and toughness of 3. And for heroes, these are fine. Like, they're nothing like super crazy, but they're solid all-rounders kind of deal. They level up fairly quickly, especially to the young bloods. That's the whole purpose of them. And this is a term we're going to come up with, or I'm going to be using a lot to compare, because there's a lot of, I would say, heroes that are in similar effect to young bloods, essentially, where they're cheap, have no experience, so they're easy to level up, and then decide how you want to play them from that. The warriors we got are generic warriors, marksmen, and swordsmen. Swordsmen are a bit more expensive, and they cost 35 gold, their weapon skill 4, and they can reroll hits when they charge, which is nice. But that's only if they're using swords. So yeah, in terms of equipment, the marksmen get a different list compared to everyone else, so they can get bows, longbows, crossbows, hunting rifles, and handguns. Generally speaking, you're going to want to avoid handguns and hunting rifles. You're probably not even going to be able to afford one. Potentially even a whole campaign, you might not get a hunting rifle. But they're just overcosted for what they are, and unless you're using the black powder rules, they're not worth it because this reduces their cost by 20%. So that's really nice, and that makes them a little bit more desirable. But handguns specifically and pistols and stuff take a turn to reload unless you have a brace of pistols. It's better to stick with crossbows instead, I'll say that. Heavy armor is also not really worth it in general unless you're house ruling stuff, but they're so expensive, and a lot of things have some sort of armor piercing. Anything strength 4 can negate one bit of heavy armor, which kind of sucks. They have a good equipment list overall. It's nice to have swords, and you have plenty of other options if you want something cheaper or more expensive for flavor and whatnot. Yeah. So, in terms of skill, all the different like factions like Reichland, Mordheim, and Marienburg have different skills, but for the most part, they don't make too much of a big difference. I would say Reichlanders and Marienburgs are a little bit better just because you get access to shooting skills, which is really nice. For all of your guys, outside of that, the strength ones are nice. Specifically, getting resilient is kind of neat, but I would say the shooting skills table is just better overall. And let's just talk about each one of these specifically. So starting with Reichland, they get a 12-inch leadership bubble for their captain instead of the usual 6. By the way, every leader has this skill. So bringing it up to 12 inches is a big deal. Especially for humans where your average is 7 all across the board, 6 for young bloods. And fear is a big deal in this game. Fear can be really annoying to fight against, so it's nice just being able to have a little bit better leadership for leadership tests. And then they also get +1 to ballistic skill for their marksmen specifically, which is nice. So getting ballistic skill 4 off the bat is nice. So normally you hit on 3s, but then you got to keep in mind modifiers like cover and range are usually an account that you're going to have to take. So normally you're hitting on 6s here, now you're hitting on 5s. That makes a big difference. So Reichlanders, you usually want a bit of a focus on marksmen with them. Now Mordheim, their only difference is that they get strength 4 on their captain and their champions. This can be good. It negates some armor, and usually means that you're wounding most things on 3s. That's pretty nice, honestly. Like, that's solid. Still, it's only on your captain and your champion, so 3 of your guys. It also means that you kind of want to be a little bit more aggressive with them, and you want your guys into combat more often. But still, it's like okay-ish. And then Marienburg, they get +1 to finding rare items. So how rare items work in Mordheim is you roll 2d6 to try and find a rare item. If you equal or beat that, then you are able to buy that rare item. So for example, like Black Lotus or something like that is a poison that's rare, or a Holy Tome is another one. And so this just makes it easier to get those rare items, which is nice. And then outside of that, they get 100 extra gold. Or if you're doing like specific games where it's a different amount, it's like 20% more gold. That's really nice. it means you can really upgrade your heroes and your young bloods and stuff like that to have a lot more equipment and whatnot. And I think that makes a big difference, honestly. So yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite of them, I think. So I would say I think all of them are scrappers, to be honest, because of just how generic they are. And all of them, I think, I would argue, have a rougher start. I would say Mordheim is the weakest just because it's just strength 4 on 3 of your guys. And that's kind of mediocre. The Reichlanders are better than them for sure with their shooting. And that's nice. But it's only for their marksmen. However, the leadership bubble is really nice. But for me, the Marienburger's 100 extra gold is so great, especially for that early game where your early game is a little bit rougher. And this means you can hire more warriors who can take the damage instead of like your heroes that might go out of action instead. You might hire more warriors so that they go out of action potentially instead of like your heroes. And you could buy more armor or just better weapons kind of deal. So yeah, that's where I would put them. And it feels fitting that I would say they're the easiest warband to start with because they're the simplest. All the human mercenary warbands are nice because it's easy to just represent any human. They don't have to look like Reichlanders. You could make them like Ostermarkers or whatever, and you could just use this as a template basically to play them. So let's move on to Witch Hunters next because I think that's the most similar to them basically. There's a bit of differences here though. So in terms of skill table, all of them get access to academic, which of the skill tables, maybe one of the weaker-ish ones, but has some good stuff in there anyways still. And actually has some good money-making capabilities in academics, so that could be nice. And in terms of heroes, we got the captain, who is exactly the same, except he hates all spellcasters, and same with their witch hunters here as well. So it's nice. There's not too many models that are like spellcasters, usually maybe one per warband. So it doesn't come up as often, and usually, unless you're fighting like chaos specific ones, they're usually not going to want to get into combat anyways. So yeah, keep that in mind, but pretty decent. Witch Hunters kind of replace the Young Bloods. They're kind of in between the Champion and the Young Blood, where they're just 3 around the stats instead of being 2 or 4, basically, in terms of weapon skill. And again, hate all of spellcasters. And the Warrior Priest is our first spellcaster that we get to talk about. Essentially, spellcasting is pretty good in Mordheim. I don't think there's really any bad wizards or spellcasters. Priests act basically like spellcasters. You just do these tests to see if you get your prayer off. And I think all the spells for Sigmar are pretty good. Like, I don't think there's a bad one. Like, there's some that are good, but they're just hard to get off. Like, Soulfire is probably the weakest spell, and even that's not bad. But, yeah, like, Armor of Righteousness is a really good spell if you can get it off. 2-up armor save, and he causes fear and is immune to fear. Pretty good if you can get it off. So yeah, pretty solid Warrior Priest. Also, same stats except a higher leadership than the Witch Hunter. And they all get access to crossbows, pistols, heavy armor, light armor, and weapons that you want, essentially. They're lacking, like, spears and stuff, but like, pretty solid for their heroes. And then for henchmen, we have Flagellants, Warhounds, and Zealots. So Flagellants, they're immune to fear, basically. They pass all leadership tests, which is really good. Weapon skill 3. However, strength and toughness at 4 is a really big deal for humans especially. And this is really nice. They don't have access to a lot, so they can't ever get missile weapons. And they only get double-handed Morningstar flail. I suggest either sticking with the flail or the double-handed weapon. Yeah, and they can be mean. Like, they can be pretty scary. And it's cool if you can get a Lad's Got Talent, but it's a little bit harder to get them. It just depends on role, basically, though. And then Zealots are basically weapon skill, ballistic skill 2. They're kind of there to most likely to get a Lad's Got Talent, just because that's how it works. I mean, they have the same likelihood as a Flagellant. They can start at the same 0 XP, so yeah. But they're cheap, and they have a separate equipment list compared to the Witch Hunters. Instead, they can get bows, which is a nice change, and that's usually how I like equipping them, is usually have the Zealots with bows, and your other guys with some crossbows, swords, and that kind of thing. And then lastly, Warhounds. Warhounds are really good. Movement 6, so that means they can run 12, they can charge 12, so that's a huge threat range. And they have weapon skill 4 and strength 4 and initiative 4. Like, those are really good stats to have. They can never gain experience. Most animals in the game can't. I think there's like one exception I can think of, or two actually exceptions I can think of. But still, really good, especially for their gold cost. Yeah, this is a good warband. I think they belong not in dominant, but I would say battle-hardened. They're a little bit more expensive. They still have some of the downsides of like mercenaries. However, they're a little bit better than them, and they have access to a spellcaster that definitely makes them better. Their henchmen, I would argue, are a little bit better, but they lack a little bit of shooting, and their equipment list is a little bit lackluster. Yeah, I would say a little bit of a mixed bag, but it's definitely a step up from mercenaries, basically. And then we're going to move on to sisters, and I would argue sisters are just better versions of witch hunters. They're a bit different, though, and they play different. They play similar, but still different, and they're the first warband we're talking about that has their own special skills, and most of these special skills are really good for the most part. Some are depending what you're facing, like if you know you're facing Skaven, Undead, or Possessed, then this is a good skill to have, for example. But yeah, pretty good overall. All of them can get academic skills for their heroes. They lack shooting. That's their big downside, but they make up for their lack of shooting skills in a strange way. But basically, they're a little bit more expensive in terms of characters. Instead of being 30 like the witch hunters are, they're 35. And their weapon skill 4 instead of weapon skill 3, which is what they make up with it. The sister superior. The matriarch is your spellcaster, so your leader's your spellcaster instead. And she's pretty good at weapon skill. Ballistic skill 4 is nice. And then you have the augur, who's like an interesting character because they get to reroll hits, they get to reroll failed characteristic tests, and they let you roll 2 dice for exploration and pick either result, basically. So they're a good way to basically get a bit more money, which is really helpful. And even in combat, just because they're weapon skill 2 doesn't mean they're bad with rerolling hits. In shooting and or close combat, it makes a big difference, honestly. And if you get a level up on them, that's even better. And they have a pretty easy equipment list. There's nothing different, basically, from their henchmen, except heroes can only get, like, Holy Tomes, Blessed Water, and Holy Relic, which are fun, like, anti-undead, anti-chaos, basically, miscellaneous equipment that you can get. They get access to slings, which is, like, one of the few human warbands that get slings, so they can have some... And slings are very strong, by the way, especially for their gold cost. They're range 18, I think, and you get to shoot twice with them. Pretty mean, honestly. And in terms of equipment, they don't get swords, which is a downside, I would say. Not being able to parry kind of sucks. However, they get the Steel Whip and the Sigmar Warhammer, and we can take a look at those. Those are fun. So the Warhammer is +1 strength and has concussion and holy. So concussion on a 2 to 4, you treat a stunned result. It's treated as a stun result. On a 1 to 2 is normally a knockdown, but they just have a slightly better hammer, essentially. So a lot more likely you're going to stun person and potentially just take them out of action on the next combat step, basically, with them. Holy weapons, they get a +1 to wound bonus on possessed or undead models. Now, depending on how you... basically, you should talk to your opponent or your campaign organizer if you're using other, like, chaotic bands outside of possessed or any undead warbands outside of, like, the Restless Dead, or Beastmen, or, like, Carnival of Chaos. Like, if you're using any of those, you should discuss with your opponent and your campaign organizer if you want to, like, have that +1 bonus to them. Usually that's how we've done in my campaigns, and it makes sense, basically. So that makes them even more stronger. In almost every campaign, there's usually at least one undead or one possessed player, so... yeah, that comes up fairly often. Even without this rule, it's still pretty nice to just have +1 strength on your characters, making them strength 4. And the Steel Whip is interesting. It gives you an extra attack, and it can't be parried, which is nice. Oh, and when they're charged, I think they get an extra attack as well. And this attack strikes first. So yeah, the Steel Whip can be pretty annoying to fight against, and it's pretty scary, I would say. You don't want to have all your people equipped with Steel Whips, though. And it can get expensive at the start, especially. And the Warhammer's still, I would say, better than the Steel Whip, so you want to have a mix of them. And other weapons, too. Your henchman, I would say, is probably lacking compared to other henchman groups, but novices are super cheap at 15 points. These are kind of like your cannon fodder, that's their whole point. Their weapon skill and ballistic skill, too. So they're nothing really outstanding. And Sigmarite Sisters are there basically to hopefully get a Lad's Got Talent so you can get to 6 heroes, and they're just fine for what they are. So yeah, I think they're actually a pretty good warband. They have essentially an extra way to get some extra income. Like, they all have the academic skills, and the Augur helps with that. Their close combat abilities are better than the Witch Hunters. I think they belong in Dominant Force. The fact that they also get access to slings is pretty nasty. They have their own skill list, with most of these being okay or good, basically. And yeah, they're pretty just solid warband. They're hard to take down, especially at the start. They have a really good early game, usually. Yeah. Moving on, we've got Undead next I want to talk about. So now we're getting into the basically non-human factions at this point. So, from the official Mordheim rulebook, there's others that I'll talk about later on. But Undead, I would say, are very good. They're interesting. Again, you have two characters. You have two characters that can get academic skills, the Vampire and the Necromancer. Necromancer basically is your spellcaster again, and they go from the Necromancy skill chart. And this one is pretty good. I would say Lifestealer is the weakest one in my opinion. But Reanimation, Spell of Awakener are very, very good. Being able to get zombies for free is nice. So yeah, those are really good abilities. 35 gold for weapon skill and ballistic skill 3. Like, yeah, solid all-around spellcaster there. The dregs are essentially Youngbloods or Youngings that are weapon skill, ballistic skill 2. So they suck for that reason, but they are 20 gold, so they're cheaper. And they get access to bows. That's usually how you want to equip your dregs, usually like with bows and then maybe some melee weapon. You don't want to invest too much early on until it gets something. And then, speaking of investment, your leader, the Vampire, is a big deal. Weapon skill 4, ballistic skill 4, strength 4, toughness 4, 2 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 8, and 6 movement. That is very good. And the fact that he's your leader with 2 wounds means he's hard to take down. This is a very dominant. He basically is one of the reasons why this is a really good force. He can dominate battlefields alone, just by himself. He is terrifying. He causes fear, speaking of terrifying. He's immune to fear, of course. He's immune to poison effects. And they treat stunned as knockdown. All undead, by the way, do this. The wizard, the necromancer, and the dregs don't count as undead, but the zombies, direwolves, do count as undead. And speaking of which, zombies are your El Cheapo, basically henchmen. They can't gain XP, they can't run, but they're super cheap, and you usually get some for free, basically from certain events that happen in Mordheim, from either exploration, spellcasting, or injury rules, basically. There's ways to get zombies that you don't have to pay for them, but even so, you might want to buy anyways, because they're super just cannon fodder. Yeah. And then same thing with the direwolves. And the direwolves are one of the better parts, I would say, of the undead henchmen. They're one of the best henchmen, in my opinion. Movement 9. They can't march, but still, movement 9, charging 18. That's a huge threat range. Weapon skill 3, strength 4 is a big deal. On the turn they charge, they get 2 extra attacks, which, you know, that makes a big difference as well. And again, immune to psychology, so even just because they're ignore this leadership 4 for the most part, because that doesn't matter. They're immune to psychology, they cause fear, immune to poison, they can't gain XP, which is the one downside, but that's almost every animal. But they're expensive, but totally worth it, especially like mid to late game. You'll probably want to like max out the amount of wolves you have. They're pretty terrifying. And then the ghouls, this is how you get Lad's Got Talent. So I do suggest at the start getting at least one ghoul, because they're the only one who can get XP, and then max out the amount of heroes you can have is pretty good. They cause fear. They're not undead though, so they're not immune to poison and immune to psychology. And they're only weapon skill 2. They're toughness 4 though, which is really good. That they are a bit tanky, and they have 2 attacks. However, they can't use weapons, but they ignore the unarmed like modifier to that. They don't care that they use nothing. They're used to that. So pretty good. They are a little bit expensive, but the extra attack, the extra toughness makes up for it. I would say Undead are a dominating force. I think they're worse than Sisters of Sigmar still, but they're pretty mean. It's a little bit of you want to invest a lot into the vampire, and then you want to invest some money into direwolves and ghouls, but they're a pretty terrifying warband to go with. Let's talk about Skaven next, since we're on the theme of non-humans first in the Mordheim rulebook. So I would say this is probably one of the more infamous, like, really strong warbands, and they definitely, like, we'll take a look and I'll explain why, basically, but they get access to their own equipment. Honestly, the pistols are a bit of a meme. I think they're, if you're using the black powder chart to make them a bit cheaper, they could be worth it, but I think they're a little too much for range 8, when, like, a dueling pistol is a range 10, I believe. And it's a little overkill on this, like, the save modifier. I think it's just more for fun and visuals that you would take these more than anything. I don't think they're worth it. Or if you get a shooting skill, it increases your, like the amount you shoot with and some modifiers, then yeah, take the Warblock pistol. Blowpipes, I haven't really seen these used that effectively. You can use them while hidden, which is kind of cool. But and the poison is nice. It's essentially Black Lotus, so if you hit a 6, it auto wounds. That's pretty cool. It's just the range is 8, and it is still strength 1. So if you don't get that 6, you're not gonna wound. Also, it gives them +1 to say it. Like, for 25 gold now, don't get this. Fighting Claws are cool. They give you an extra attack. You can parry with them. Gives you +1 to your initiative when making climbing tests, which is good. I will say you're more likely to pass an initiative test with Skaven anyways, because you're like initiative 5 at minimum usually. You can't use other weapons because, they're paired up. For 35 gold, if you can afford this, yeah, this is a solid weapon to get. They're good. It gives you 2 parries, or a reroll of a parry attempt, sorry. So that's pretty good. The Weeping Blades are basically, they have Black Lotus, basically, like the blowpipes do, so 6 up to hit gives you poison, so that's good, and gives you a parry. And again, they're used in pairs, so you can buy 2. That gives you an extra attack. I mean, that's pretty good. But again, they're a bit expensive, like 50. So if you can afford them, sure, get a pair. Like, they're good. And then you have skills that are all pretty solid. I'm trying to think of any of these that are like they're not great. Like Wall Runner, I would say is it's decent. It can be really good, but depends on your terrain situation too. Infiltration is very good. So like these special skills that all of them get access to, by the way, all the heroes, it's pretty good. Speaking of heroes, let's move on to that. So your leader, 60 again. With strength 4 instead of strength 3 like the mercenary captain for the same gold cost, 6 movement, and 5 initiative. That's a big amount of movement for basically all the characters in the Skaven list. Basically, they all are mostly movement 6 or 5. High initiative is really nice, and they get an extra -1 to the armor save the enemy does, sorry. So they basically get an extra AP in both shooting and close combat. Really good. Like, nothing wrong there. That's a really scary, like, list of things you can get on them. And the Black Skaven are basically like the champions, except with strength 4, 6 movement, and 5 initiative. Very good again. I don't like the fact that you get access to so much strength 4. It feels a little bit not flavorful for Skaven. It's a little bit weird to think that Skaven have access to the most strength 4 essentially at the start, which is a little bit weird in my opinion. And then your sorcerer, who uses the horned rat magic, which is all pretty decent, I would say. There's nothing. Most of the spells are cheap to cast or 0 to cast. Like, they're all pretty good. One lets you summon giant rats, which is nice. Yeah, nothing bad there. And then Night Runners are essentially young bloods that are a little bit more because they have better ballistic skill and higher initiative and higher movement. Yeah, your heroes are just good. Like, this is very good. That high movement makes a big deal, and the high initiative is also a big deal. And then Verminkin, you're kind of like warrior, essentially. You're generic, not like super expensive, not the cheapest warrior. Nothing wrong here, basically. Pretty average. Giant Rats, which are weapon skill 2, but high initiative. You can recruit as many as you want. They don't get XP. They're just super cheap and just way to annoy your opponents, basically, and just get in the way of your opponent doing things. Especially with movement 6, so you can run 12. Like, that can be really annoying. And they're great for supporting as well, if you just get a bunch of them into combat while you have, like, a Verminkin or one of your heroes in there. And then the first big guy we get to talk about, the Rat Ogre. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of most big guys, and the Rat Ogre is still one of them that I don't like. Very expensive. You get weapon skill 3, ballistic skill 3, which is Movement 6 is nice. Strength and toughness of 5 is very good. 3 wounds makes them pretty hard to kill. At 3 attacks is a lot. And they cause fear. But they are subject to stupidity unless you have a hero nearby. So you kind of want to run them with at least one of your heroes nearby, or else they're just going to go stupid with leadership 4. The big downsides are these two, though. They can't get XP, so they're never going to go above weapon skill 4, which is a big downside. Or, sorry, weapon skill 3. That's a big downside, I would say. And large target basically means they can be shot at even if they aren't the closest target, and they're +1 to hit. That's pretty rough. Even with toughness 4, they have no armor. And they can't use weapons ever, by the way, as well. So, it's an investment, and I don't think it's all that worth it when you could just buy a lot of different equipment and more fun equipment. You don't get access to heavy armor, but like I just said before, that's not a big loss, honestly. Yeah, overall, they're pretty good. I would say they're our first Apex Predator. Like, that their movement and their initiative make them really able to control the board plays, especially if you're like fighting someone who's a bit slower, like Undead or Dwarves. They dominate them. Yeah. And then moving on, we have Dwarf Treasure Hunters next. And I think this is one of the weaker from the official rulebook. Probably I'll talk about it a little bit later. So, in terms of special rules, they're harder to take out of action. They're taken out of action only on a 6 instead of a 5, which is cool, and it's nice. 1 to 2, they're knocked down. 3 to 5, they're stunned. They can't be stunned from maces and clubs, like everyone else can be. They don't have any penalty for armor, which is cool. They hate orcs and goblins. They can't hire elves. We're not going to talk about any hired swords or dramatis personae today. That's going to be sort of a separate own video, I think. And when they're looking for... when they're exploring, they get an extra piece of treasure or weird stone, essentially, which is neat, I will say it right now. That seems good, but I'll explain why they have that anyways. And in terms of equipment, they get a pretty long list of stuff. They can get Gromniel armor, which buffs the weapon. I forget exactly. I think it makes their armor... gives them -1 to armor saves or something like that. And Gromniel armor is just better armor, basically. So, yeah, that's cool. They're very expensive, though. And they have Dwarf Axe, which is essentially an axe that has parry. And an extra -1 to save. Pretty good. Nothing like super special here, but it's neat if you can afford them. And their skills are okay or good, I would say. Like, they're pretty fine. Like, Master of Blades is good, and Extra Tough is nice as well. Resource Hunter is okay. True Git, it helps. Yeah, like they're okay or good. So let's go over their list, though. So, a whopping 85 gold for the Dwarf Noble because he's weapon skill 5. I really don't like that. It's not worth that weapon skill 5. All dwarves are movement 3, which is rough. I don't like that about them. That's probably one of their big downsides, are their movement and initiative. All of them are initiative 2, which is rough. They all get toughness 4, which is kind of why they're so slow and everything. I think that's supposed to make up for it, but it's such a bad downside. And like crits happen often enough where this, I don't know, can make that still not like that super good. Even just because they can go down to be taken out of action only on the 6, even if they're just not, because you have low numbers, you're still getting get swarmed, and then if you get stunned, then you get taken out of action by another guy in combat with you. And this is just a problem with all dwarves. The engineer gives you like extra range on your pistols, crossbows, and handguns, which is neat. It's a cool little thing. It's weird that they gave him weapon skill 4 and then ballistic skill 3. I think that should be swapped around. And then you don't have any like youngings essentially, which is kind of bad in my opinion. Instead, you get 2 dwarf slayers, 50 gold, which is a lot. Weapon skill 4, toughness 4. And they are immune to psychology, and they get their own skill trait that they can use from as well, so they can get like -1 to hit the turn they charge. They can wound on 4s no matter what your toughness is, +1 to hit and when she charges. Like, they're all like fine or good abilities, but like, you don't have anything that can level up real quickly either here. Like, the Troll Slayers start at 8 XP instead of like 0 like youngins do. And then the biggest downside of this Warband, in my opinion, is that you only have 4 heroes. Almost every other Warband has 5 to start with. But it really means at the start, imagine you have one of your Troll Slayers go out of action. That means you're rolling 3 dice. That sucks for exploration. So it's hard to get income with this faction. And that's why they have that +1 weird stone, so they get extra treasure to make up for it. But it's not enough. It's still bad. And if any of your heroes dies, it's so expensive to replace any of them. And 85 gold for the Dwarf Noble is not worth it, just because he's weapon skill 5. Like, yeah, he's slightly better at hitting like champions or like anything weapon skill 4, sure, but like, for 85, I don't know. And then for henchmen, we've got the Dwarf Clansmen, the Dwarf Funders, and the Beardlings. So the Clansmen, weapon skill 4, solid, right? Like, these are supposed to be, I guess, your warriors, but they're a little bit more expensive. And honestly, the reason they're not solid is that initiative and movement. I'm going to keep repeating that, because it's the biggest downside of this faction. Outside of their economy, that's not good for them. Beardlings, which are like supposed to be your El Cheapos, are still 25 gold. Because they're toughness 4, essentially. And then Dwarf Funders, these guys get access to guns. And here's another weird one. They're still weapon skill 4 also, the Thunders, though they're decent in combat, but not shooting right off the bat. Again, kind of weird in my opinion. But they do get their crossbows and guns to have like 6-inch range. It's extra 6-inch range, which is kind of nice. And you kind of want to equip them with crossbows unless you have that 20% discount on black powder. And it's kind of weird that you don't get crossbows for your heroes also. I think that's kind of a downside. That kind of sucks. This is a faction that I would give Curse to. It needs a rework, and the current campaign that I'm working on with a friend, we are reworking Dwarfs, like, completely. Because, like, it's just too rough. They got too many downsides, and the initiative 2 is so bad. Like, sure, movement 3 is bad, but also not being able to climb anything that makes you do an initiative test is so rough. Like, I get it, dwarves are supposed to be slow, but they should have some bonus for climbing or jumping, or maybe not jumping, but like climbing stuff, right? I don't know. Especially if they're mine workers, right? You'd feel like they'd know how to climb a decent bit. It's also, I just don't like the layout. Like, it's very weird and random to have like troll slayers, engineer. Like, I feel like they should have had beardlings as a hero instead of troll slayers, and maybe you get replace beardlings with troll slayers instead, where they are in this roster, in my opinion. Yeah, not a great warband in my opinion. One of the definitely the weakest in 1A at least. And then finally, we're going to talk about the last from the Mordheim rulebook, and that's Cult of Possessed. And they, I think, are the most different out of the warbands, I would argue. They still have some similarities to others, but I digress. They are pretty fun to play. I played them twice now, and I've enjoyed them. So Magister, your leader, another leader spellcaster, kind of like the Sisters had. I would argue the Chaos one is better than Prayers of Sigmar, but that could be debated. And he's pretty solid at 70 gold. Like weapon skill and ballistic skill 4 is really nice. Access to a lot of good weapons and bow. You even get missiles weapons on them. Yeah, pretty solid all around with their spellcasting too. And then you have Mutants and Possessed as your other heroes. Now, let's start with Mutants, and then we'll talk about Possessed. So, Mutants are basically kind of like your youngins, but their weapon skill, ballistic skill 3 for 25 gold instead of the 15. And basically mutations, so them and Possessed both get access to mutations. You have to buy them right away, or you don't get access to them. You can't, like, pay for an upgrade of one unless you're using the optional rule for the Chaos Ritual table. So when you roll for a skill, you can do the rewards of the Shadow Lord instead, which can give you mutations, chaos armor, demon weapons, or possessed, or outright die. That is the one downside, but that's only on a double one, and it makes it fun and flavorful. So I do suggest you use those rules for them in a campaign. And the mutations are all good. I would say Demon Soul is the weakest one, just because there's not a lot of spellcasters out there, and it's just a 4-up save against the effects of spells or prayers. But like Great Claw is really good. An extra attack with +1 strength, very good. +1 movement, also very good. Like none of these, I'm like, oh, these are bad. No, these are good. The one downside also is every subsequent mutation that you buy will cost double. So let's say I buy the Great Claw and I want to buy the Tentacle. The Tentacle would cost me 70 gold instead of 35 gold. So there's a lot of investments on mutations. Generally, the Mutants, I don't even bother buying mutations on. Instead, I give everything to the Possessed. And the Possessed are expensive, but they start at weapon skill 4, movement 5, strength 4, toughness 4, 2 wounds, initiative 4, and 2 attacks. They cause fear. They're terrifying. They are an investment, though. They are very costly. And basically, if you're not playing without that ritual rule, it's hard to buy mutations for your guys. And the fact that you can't get them later on normally makes it even harder to, like, purchase them. So yeah, depending if you're using that optional rule or not will affect how good the Possessed are. But the Possessed are still just even good without any mutation that you buy. Like, it's pretty terrifying to have, like, toughness 4 and 2 wounds. If you get, like, the, yeah, they have access to strength, so that means they can get resilient, so that you could get -1 to wound on top of toughness 4 and 2 wounds. Just because they can't get armor or weapons, they're still just so good. But again, super expensive. And then we've got Henchmen. There's Dark Souls, Brethren, and Beastmen. Dark Souls are interesting. Basically, they auto-pass leadership tests, and that's kind of why they got so expensive, because they're strength 4 as well. Their weapon skill 2, though, they're a mixed bag in my opinion. I don't think they're terrible, but for their cost, I don't know. Usually I get them later on in a campaign and never at the start of a campaign, just because of their gold cost. Brethren, your generic warrior basically. Nothing special going on there. And then the Beastmen, they get the same equipment list as Dark Souls. They have a different equipment list we'll look at, but they start at toughness 4 and 2 wounds, which is nice, and weapon skill 4. Yeah, instead of buying Dark Souls, you should just buy Beastmen instead. Basically, like they're pretty solid, and I think let's look at the equipment list now for Dark Souls. So yeah, you don't get access to missile weapons essentially. That's the only difference. Oh, and they don't get spears. Instead, they get a flail, which yeah, overall, like, this warband is pretty solid. It's an investment to play them. Early game, they can dominate. But if you get unlucky with some rolls, like, obviously unlucky with anyone, being unlucky sucks with anyone, but, like, losing a Possessed or a Magister right off the bat is pretty bad, especially losing Possessed. They're hard to replace. And that's why I wouldn't put them into Apex. I think they're better than Undead. I don't know if they're better than Sisters, just because of their expensive point cost. But if they do well early game, they're going to dominate late game for sure. Late campaign, I mean. Yeah, and so that's it for the official, like, rulebook. So if you're only playing the official, this is where I kind of place them, basically. And I think all of these warbands visually and narratively fit. The dwarves still need a rework, though, and I don't recommend playing dwarves without any house rules, because, man, they suck. And every campaign I've played, there has been a dwarf player, and they either do mediocre or just bad at the end. So yeah. We're going to move on to the Empire in Flames warbands, and there's only 2, so we're going to start with Beastmen. And the first time I looked at Beastmen, I thought, oh, they're kind of meh. But I actually think they are very good, actually. So, the Beastman Chieftain is your hero, like your mercenary captain, or your leader, sorry, I should say. For 5 more gold, though, you get +1 strength and toughness, and a higher initiative. You lose out on 1 leadership, and you have higher movement, too. They're good. Like, for their cost, this is a very good stat line. And same thing with, like, all their heroes. They have great stat lines for their costs, essentially. Keep it like the Troll Slayer is the same toughness, but it has worse initiative, worse movement, and worse strength. So I don't know. They don't get access to like unique skills and are not immune to psychology, but still, this is really good. Beastman Shaman uses the same chaos ritual table like the Cult of Possessed Magister does. Also really good for like their point cost, like weapon skill 4, toughness 4. Again, very, very good. Movement 5 on everybody, and except for the Centaur, which we'll talk about now, who's movement 8. So essentially a charge range of 16. That's pretty mean. They're low initiative. That is their downside. They get an extra attack with like their hoofs, so they get like, that's why this is in brackets here. They get an extra attack with that, which is nice. And they can become drunk. And the first time I looked at this, I thought, oh man, this sucks. So basically every turn you roll a die, and on a 1, you have to test if they're stupid or not. So you have to roll a 1, then fail a leadership test. So you have like 2 ways where this isn't going to affect anything, to be honest. And then 2 to 5, nothing happens. And 6, they become frenzied, which, you know, is good. Gives you an extra attack, essentially. Yeah, like these heroes are a little bit expensive, but like, the Centaur is more expensive, but the others are well worth their cost in stats alone. And in terms of equipment, it's fine. You don't get access to missile weapons, which is the weakness, I would say, of Beastmen. And actually, that's another thing I didn't bring up enough, is the slings for Sisters of Sigmar makes them very good. And that's why Skaven are so high up here as well, is the sling spam is very nasty. So I just want to mention that here, because I didn't really talk about that. But the fact that you can get slings with these 2 makes them a little bit higher than the rest of these warbands as well. Slings are just broken without house rules. In terms of henchmen, you got Ungors, Gors, Warhounds, and Minotaur. So Ungors, kind of your weakest of the weak, kind of cheap. They can't get Lads Got Talent, so they can't become heroes, basically. But generic stats, meh on everything. Just buy Gors instead if you can afford them. Better weapon skill and higher toughness for 35 gold. Really good. Whereas Warhounds of Chaos are your super cheap. Like, instead of getting an Ungor, get Warhounds instead for the weapon skill 4 and strength 4. They can't get XP because they're animals, like all like the dogs basically are. Yeah, good stats there. And then the big guy, the Minotaur. I think this is the best big guy that anyone has access to. That I can think of, at least. This is definitely the best, like, big monster. So, movement 6 is good. Weapon skill 4. Strength 4. Toughness 4. 3 wounds, 3 attacks. So most other big guys have strength 5 and toughness 5. However, they can get weapons and armor, which makes them a lot better. They cause fear. They can potentially get frenzied, but I wouldn't count on that when they kill somebody. They can get XP, and that's the big difference, is they can never become a hero from Lads Got Talent, but they can gain experience. So you can get them to have higher weapon skill, higher strength. Like, that makes them way better than a lot of the other big guys there. Like, they're still large, of course, but for their cost, this is better than a Rat Ogre, hands down. Like, equipping them with a sword is such a big deal because that means they can parry, and also being like toughness 4, it means they're a little hard to not be able to disable that parry from them also. Like, they're good. And they got their own special skills, and all of these I think are really good actually. Rerolling route tests is great, an extra attack on with their strength, nice. Immune to fear and terror, and all alone test, good. Being able to buy a mutation is a really cool one. That can be fun. Giving them just an extra +1 to save essentially is nice, and hating human warbands, which almost definitely you're going to encounter human warbands. It'd be really weird if there was no human warband in whatever you were playing. This is a very, very solid warband, and they don't have missile weapons. That is their biggest downside. Outside of that, this is pretty good. Your heroes are an investment, but unlike Cult of Possessed, it's not as expensive. I almost want to put them in Apex, but I think I'm just going to put them at the top of Dominant. High movement, again, like Skaven as well, at movement 5. That one that one movement does make a big difference, basically. But they are a little bit more expensive than Skaven in terms of like what you can get, but early game they're great. Late game they're probably going to be very good. And they don't suffer the problems like vampires or Cult of Possessed do, where if you lose a hero, you can't afford them. Usually you can afford something that's 45 gold compared to like the like a vampire dying or your Cult of Possessed mutants dying. Like, it would suck to replace the Centaur, granted, but still. And they also have one of the best big guys out there, if you can afford them later on in the campaign, basically. And then the other one we have is Carnival of Chaos. And I've got mixed feelings. I think this warband looks really cool. The narrative is really cool. I love the idea of them. Basically, they have an interesting equipment list that we'll talk about in a second here. And some interesting heroes. So Carnival Master, so another, basically it's the Magister. And they use Nurgle rituals instead of Chaos rituals, which is a bit different. All of these are pretty decent. Some of them are expensive. And Nurgle's Rot in specific, I want to talk about what this does later on, but not right now. We'll talk about that when we talk about the traits that the Tainted ones can get, basically. So decent Carnival Master, like decent, nothing super special here, but he's a good spellcaster. The thing is, their spells are kind of expensive and well, it depends what you get, but 8 average kind of means you're not getting your spells off usually when you want them to. So yeah. Then you got Brutes, who are 60 points, which is a lot. Weapon skill 4, strength 4, initiative 2 kind of sucks, but 2 attacks. So these guys seem scary right off the bat, and then they get Strongman, which lets them use double-handed weapons at their initiative. And that seems kind of good at first, but then you're initiative 2. So unless you're facing dwarves or like anything like undead, you're probably not going first anyways. And like you're probably striking last anyways. And the brutes can only get a double-handed weapon and a flail, so no armor on them, no way to parry really. So that's a downside of them. But they are admittedly pretty scary at weapon skill 4, toughness 4. But they're expensive for what they can do. Tainted ones. Now, these ones are kind of like your, I guess, kind of like a youngin in a bit. Because I think they are 0 XP, right? Yeah, they're 0 XP. And they can get the Blessings of Nurgle, which we're going to go over now. Basically, kind of like the mutations where you can buy them, and each one that you buy basically doubles the cost of the second one you buy. You can't buy new blessings after recruitment also, so that's the one downside. Most of these are cool, like Stream of Corruption is a way you can get ranged attacks, because this is the only ranged attacks you can get really outside of spellcasting, I guess, for Nurgle, or Carnival of Chaos, I should say. -1 to hit in close combat against this person, that's very good. A lot more resilience that way. Speaking of resilience, +1 wound and toughness is very good. However, -1 movement for that. I don't know. For 40 gold, I would be questioning that one, basically. And instead, you could just get this for 35 gold to get an extra wound and immune to poison, which I think is just better than bloated foulness. And then this one causes fear. At 40-ish points, I would also be a bit hesitant to get this one. And then, this is what I really don't like about Carnival of Chaos, Nurgle's Rot. So basically, if you get a 6 to hit against somebody, they contracted the Rot, basically a plague. Once they've contracted it, your opponent will have to mark that down. Each time they go into battle, at the start of each battle, they have to pass a toughness test. If they're successful, nothing happens. But if they fail, they lose a point of toughness. And if they ever go to 0 toughness, they just die. So it's a slow way to potentially kill someone, but also just lowering toughness is brutal. Like, someone that's normally toughness 3 is just going to toughness 2. That sucks. And if you roll a 6 on the toughness test, it also passes the rot to another member of that warband, and they have to randomly allocate it. This is just such a feels bad. It's a lot of housekeeping for your opponent also. It's something they have to remember as well. It's just not fun. Lowering toughness is pretty brutal. The fact that it can contract to multiple people in your warband. I get the theme, and it's narratively a cool idea, but I think it's just too mean in an ability. And yeah, I don't think you should be playing Mordheim that way. So this is something I've house ruled to do a completely different effect altogether. It's mean, and if there's a spell I can do it, and then also the plague cart, which we'll talk about, also has somebody that has the Nurgle's Rot on him as well. So let's go into henchmen. So you have demons in this army, so you have 2 plague bearers you can get. They're a little bit expensive. They can't wear equipment, and they don't use weapons, but their weapon skill 4, 2 attacks, strength 4, toughness 4, initiative 4. Nothing wrong there. And then they got a ton of abilities, which makes them great, I would say, like -1 to hit in combat. They have the vomit attack, basically. They can't gain XP, they're immune to poison, immune to psychology, they cause fear, they have a 5-up ward save. They have demonic instability, which means they have a more likelihood of dying from being taken out of action. And if you have a rout, you have to do a leadership test, and if they fail, they're destroyed. But your leadership 10, so that's likely not going to happen anyways. Pretty solid, but they are just a bit of an investment, I'd say, for 50 gold, basically. Nurglings are your El Cheapo demons, essentially, at 15 gold. And you'd think they'd be lower weapon skill, and lower strength even, but Nurglings are weapon skill and strength 3, like, no, that's pretty good. They are toughness 2, though, which kind of sucks. And they have the same abilities like the plagues do, except you can have more than 5 Nurglings in a henchman group. There's also ways to summon them, which is nice. For 15 gold, they're fun, and you probably are going to end up getting a bunch of them. And then Brethren, your generic, these are the people who's going to get Lads Got Talent, basically, generic warrior stats, and that's fine. And then the Plague Cart. The Plague Cart, I suggest you don't allow people to get unless you're playing with Empire in Flames rule, which allows everyone to get the cards. Otherwise, they're a little bit complicated, really hard to kill, basically impossible to kill for some warbands, essentially, because if you hit the card itself as toughness 8 with 4 wounds, that's really hard to kill. It is very good. It gives you an extra, allows you to have more warriors in your warband, and it lets you buff your plague bearers and nurglings, making them a little bit harder to kill. And it has a guardian who's kind of like the driver, I guess, who can attack, and he has the Nurgle's Rot, so another way to get Nurgle's Rot, and it's immune to psychology. Very good, especially for its cost. Like, you'll probably get it mid to late campaign, and it can be very dominating and really annoying to kill. But I suggest you don't allow it to be used unless you're all playing with the ability to get cards, basically. Otherwise, it's just an unfair advantage that you're the only one that can get them. I think they have the potential of being dominant. I think they are slightly weaker in some sense compared to Cult of Possessed. They're kind of around the same point, I would say. Like, but you have way more expensive stuff, and the brutes are very expensive also, and you have a lot less options for them compared to like the the Possessed, which I think are just better versions of Brutes, just because of that initiative too, and only being able to get a double-handed weapon or a flail makes them a little meh, in my opinion. Tainted ones are essentially mutants with a different mutation list, and I think the mutation list is a little bit better than Blessings of Nurgle. This, except for, okay, Nurgle's Raw is very good, but good in a different kind of way, and a feels bad kind of way. Which, yeah, mixed opinion on that one. So I think it should just go beside Cult of Possessed, really. If you allow the cart, I would push them higher up, but for my sake, I would say don't do that, and I'd put them here, a little bit behind Cult of Possessed. They are expensive, but you do get stuff that's cheap, like the 15-point Nurglings, for example. So yeah, that's it from Empire in Flames, and then we're going to move on to Averlanders, who are basically kind of like the Mercenary Warband, but they are different enough. They have some different heroes and stuff, and equipment list is very different. The captain is the same. There's nothing different about him compared to Mercenaries. That's exactly the same. The sergeant you can get one of, which is basically a champion. He's just weapon skill 4. And then you have Bergjagers, which are ballistic skill 4, weapon skill 2. So they're nice to have. And you get 2 of these, and you only get 1 Youngblood instead. That's kind of the trade-off there. And they have a kind of a cute, I would say, gimmick with these like traps that you can set up. Generally, they don't do much, but they have the potential of doing stuff, and some people might question trying to charge them, which does help them a bit because they are weapon skill 2. And then you have a single Youngblood, which is how you get a quick level up on him. And the Youngblood, the Sergeant, and the Captain all use the Mountain Guard equipment list. The Bergjager use the Marksman. The Marksman one is pretty nice. You get access to like most of the guns, which unless you're using black powder, don't buy them basically. And you want to equip them usually with longbows, I suggest, or crossbows. Either one I think is a fine choice. And the Mountain Guard are cool. They get access to dueling pistols, crossbows, and bows still. They get access to like all the kind of weapons you would want. So versatile, like the other mercenary equipment lists are. You get access to shooting on your Bergjagers, your Youngblood, and your Captain too, which is nice. All of them get the speed skills as well, which is interesting to note. So yeah, this is just a better hero group, I would say, than the generic Mercenaries. Mountain Guards are kind of like your better warriors at weapon skill 4, kind of like the swordsmen, I guess, that Mercenaries can get. They're fine, nothing super special there. Marksmen, they get a Marksman equipment list that makes them unique, basically. They use this stuff. Oh, sorry, the Bergjager use this equipment list. Sorry, not the Marksman. They use this one. So they get access to longbows and hunting arrows, and that's how you want to equip them. They get later on in the campaign, you'll probably want to buy these because they give you +1 to injury results when you're using a bow. So those can be very nasty. And then you can get access to Halfling Scouts, which is like your cheapest option here. They are weapon skill 2, but ballistic skill 4. Strength and toughness 2, but again, the ballistic skill 4, you want these to be shooting. And they also, they can get Lads Got Talent, I believe. Yeah, they can get Lads Got Talent, I believe, but they can't use strength skills when choosing 2 skill lists. But why would you want them to have strength anyways? You want them shooting, basically. And they use the Marksman, or do they use the Scout? They use the Scout. So basically like a baby version of the Bergjager, basically. So bows are what you're going to want to equip them with. In my opinion, this is just a better version of Mercenaries. I think they belong in Scrappers. Their shooting is pretty good. They have better heroes. A little bit more, not even that much more expensive even. Yeah, solid all-arounders, I guess, compared to Mercenaries especially. I think they're just a better version of Mercenaries. And then we have Kislevites. They're a little bit different. They're kind of similar to Averlanders, that they're a little bit more unique than the other mercenary groups. They have a special thing that can give them frenzy on somebody, but it's way too expensive for what it does, so don't ever get this unless you have a lot of money. They can get vodka, which gives +1 leadership in the game they use it. But you have to do a toughness test for each guy, I think. Yeah, no, it's also not worth getting. for -1 initiative, I don't think it's worth it for the +1 leadership, really. And then let's talk about the heroes. We've got the Druzhina, again, who's basically just a mercenary captain. The one difference, I believe, is the inheritance. And basically, at the start, when you get to pick one item, which is like an inherited item that they get, which is half the cost it normally does. That is really nice. If you get robbed, though, you have to replace it as soon as you can, essentially, and you have to purchase it for 150% of its value normally. And until you get it replaced, you're at -1 to hit and -1 to tests, which kind of sucks. But like, unless you like, being robbed is very unlikely basically to happen. It's I think like a 30 something on the chart. Unlikely to actually be robbed. And you can get like a brace of pistols for 25 gold. That's really good. But even just like anything from heavy armor or something, like, makes them way better and makes it a lot cheaper to get. So very good, and it's the same cost as a normal mercenary captain. The bear tamer is just kind of like a generic warrior who lets you buy a bear essentially, and your bear will pass stupidity test. We'll get into that later on. And he's strength 4, which is nice. Nothing wrong there for its gold cost. Then you get one guy called the Assault, which is like the best warrior kind of thing. He's basically a champion. Weapon skill 4 is the same thing. And then you have youths, and you get 2 of them. Weapon skill, they're just younglings. There's nothing different there, basically. They're young bloods. And you use this list. Access to throwing knives is kind of interesting, and I think they're the only human band I can think of in 1A that gets throwing knives. And yeah, you've got a decent choices of equipment that you can buy for your guys, so yeah, pretty solid. Nothing wrong here that I can see. And then generic warrior, we've talked about warriors before. There's nothing special there. It's nice to have them, though. Cossack is, unless you're playing against a lot of Chaos Warbands, is pretty unnecessary, because all they do for 5 more gold, they get Hatred Chaos. So unless you want to specifically have them for their visual look, but then you could just have a warrior look like a Cossack, basically. And then the Streltsy are based off like the real life equivalent of them, where they have the handgun and Berdish, and you can they have a gun rest essentially using a halberd, so they got +1 to hit with handguns if they have a halberd as well. This is kind of a trap because that is super expensive, and they have their own warband trait here, as you can see. Unless you're using like the 20% discount, even still, this is very expensive to equip your guy with a halberd and handgun. But it's a cool gimmick, I'll give it that. But you're probably just better off having a crossbow on them anyways. Yeah, definitely not my favorite. Actually, do normal Kislevites get crossbows? They do. Yeah, I don't know. They are 25 gold, so they're the same cost as warriors anyways, though. So, like, unless you're late in the campaign and have a lot of gold, you're probably not doing this gun rest meme. It can be good if you have the money to spend for it, though, but you probably don't. And then the big guy that they have is a trained bear, and we talked a little bit about it with the bear tamer. Essentially, as long as you have the bear tamer near him, they're immune to stupid, but they are stupid otherwise. They can like replace all their like attacks for one single attack that's more likely to take your guy, or like do a wound basically against your opponent. It's a strength. Basically, you do a strength roll off basically, and you add your strength to that. And whoever you're strength 5, so you're most likely going to do an auto single wound with no armor save allowed. That's a pretty cool ability to do. But again, you could just do 2 attacks. That's weapon skill 3, strength 4, toughness 5, 2 wounds. They're pretty mean, and like basically almost half the cost of like the other big guys. Makes them a little bit easier to get to. And they also help out your bear tamer if he gets robbed, sold to the pits, or captured. Instead, it's just a full recovery instead of doing those effects, which is really good, as long as he's not taken out of action. It's like a unique mercenary group, but it's still a little bit in some regards, but I think it's better than all of the mercenary groups. I don't think it's battle hardened. I think it's just the top of scrappers, essentially. Yeah, And then let's go to Ostlanders next, and that's gonna round out all the humans, basically. And Ostlanders, I personally have never seen anyone play them or play as them, basically. I haven't seen them in any campaign. So yeah, let's take a look. They get access to double-barrel pistols and double-barrel hunting rifle. And double-barrel hunting rifle you're probably never getting in the game because it's super expensive, super rare to get. It's not happening. Double-barrel pistol is very good if you can get it, especially if you're using the black powder chart to make them a little bit cheaper at 20%. That makes them a little bit better, but with a double-barrel pistol, you get to shoot every round instead of having to reload every turn. Or if you have a brace of them, you get to fire twice every round, which is really nasty. So that's worth its gold cost if you can get them. And we're going to talk about the heroes now. Elder is exactly the same as any captain. Nothing different there. You have no youngins. Instead, you have 2 blood brothers, which are weapon skill 4, so champions essentially. And then you have the Priest of Tal, which is a spellcaster, and he uses the Priest of Tal, Prayers of Tal, I guess you should call it, things. And there's some neat ones here, like Summon Scrolls is actually pretty good at 2d6. Strength 1, like average 7 strength 1 hits can be very annoying to like fight against, basically. And what's his range? 12 inches of him. Tanglefoot is nice for some extra movement. Like, all pretty solid spells and all fairly easy to cast too. So that's pretty nice. The biggest downside of them is that they're 4 heroes again. Just like the dwarves, this is a pretty bad like, that's pretty bad. Like, that's just way less. And unlike the dwarves, they don't really have a way to, they don't get +1 Weirdstone or whatever like the other ones do. So that's a bit of a downside for them. Yeah. Outside of that, though, like, these are solid heroes, but only having 4 sucks. And then you get access to kin, which are just warriors, nothing different there. And then you can get Jagers, which are just marksmen, basically, nothing different there. And then you can get ruffians, which are weapon skill 2, tough, ballistic skill 2. Basically. They have a different equipment list, and they can be shrunk. What's this do? Auto pass leadership test? Oh, that's nice. And they can never become a warband leader, so if they do get Lads Got Talent, they can never become the leader. And they're a leadership 10 all the time, so very good. And then you get a big guy, you get the Ogre. So this is the only one I think who, well, outside of the Ogre Warband that I know can just get an Ogre from this chart. Oh, also Pit Fighters do as well. 160 gold, so cheaper than like the Skaven or the Minotaur. Weapon skill 3 is kind of meh. Ballistic skill 2 sucks, but you're not using that for that. Toughness and strength of 4. 3 wounds, 2 attacks. Not bad. Also, he does get Lads Got Talent unlike the Minotaur, so that's kind of cool. And they also are slower to gain advancements. Yeah, it's half the rate. So that kind of sucks. The Minotaur doesn't have that. Is it worth their gold cost? I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of these stats for the cost. Maybe if they were a weapon skill 4 at the start, like, sure, they can get XP and level up, but it's at a slower rate. That sucks. At least they get access to equipment this, though, and they have a different one. It's light arm. It's a little bit lacking, too. I wish they could get a shield. That would help them. The Jaegers get double-barrel pistols, double-barrel hunting rifle, blunderbuss. Like, that's cool that they get so many shooting abilities here. The Ruffians just are kind of worse versions of your other guys. Wish you could get crossbows. It's a little bit lacking, like, unlike the Mercenaries who has access to more for their generic Mercenaries, I guess you're supposed to be using, like, the double-barrel pistols and stuff instead with the Jaegers. Like, that's the gimmick here. I would argue this might even be... Yeah, no, this is weaker. This is a struggler. Like, 4 heroes to start with. You're better off just... If you want to play Ostlanders, just count them as, like, one of these other mercenary factions instead of using their rules, because it's bad. And that's kind of a shame, I guess. And the next one we're going to talk about, the last one here, is going to be the Orc Mob. And this one's a little bit of a dark horse, where at first you think they're bad, but I'll kind of explain my reasoning why I actually think they're pretty solid, actually. So, all their non-heroes, basically all their heroes don't have to worry about animosity. Other than that, all their henchmen do have to worry about animosity, and you will have to roll for each of them. And basically on a 1, they can go a little bit wild, but that's just how orcs play, you know? That's just the fun of them, basically. And there's also ways to negate it, but we'll talk about that later. So, starting off, we have the orc boss at 80 gold, so a bit more cost, but he's weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, and toughness 4, all good around there, basically. Not as good as the Beastman chieftain, who's like cheaper for basically the same stats and higher movement, but still pretty good. The Orc Shaman is also very good, one of the few like spellcasters that start off at toughness 4, and they use the Wa Magic, which is just down here. And I actually think Wa Magic is some of the best spells. They're very mean, like all of them are, and a lot of them have to do with close combat mostly, which makes sense for orcs. So yeah, your Orc Shaman is a beat stick usually, and then you get Biggins and weapon skill 4, toughness 4. Pretty solid all around here. And again, they only have 4 heroes. That's a downside. Don't get me wrong, but I think they make up for it in a lot of other ways, and they have an easier start even with just those 4. It's less... In my findings, I've found them a little bit harder to get rid of their heroes if you know how to play them right. And you have a pretty easy like list of equipment that you can get for them, like crossbow, bow, light armor, spears, swords. Like you get access to everything you would kind of want, which is nice. Kind of sucks that they don't get heavy armor, but still. And like your boss and your biggins still get access to the shooting skills, which is kind of interesting. You'd expect orcs to not be that great at shooting, but they're actually okay. Even the boss is a ballistic skill 4, nothing wrong there. And then for henchmen, you get boys, goblin warriors, trolls, cave squigs. So we're going to start with the boys. They're your generic warriors. They do have animosity, that is the downside, but they're toughness 4 for 25 gold, so keep that in mind. Initiative 2 does suck, but they're just better version of dwarves, honestly, because they are slightly cheaper, and it's totally worth it for that cost. And your super cheap guys, your goblin warriors, weapon skill 2, and they have animosity still, but basically orcs don't really care about them. Same with cave squigs as well. They only count as half a model in terms of routing, basically, so makes them a bit better for that reason, just because they're super cheap and you don't have to worry about routing as much as other like small guys if you have a lot of cannon fodder and they die. The one downside they do have is if they ever do get lads got talent, they just get killed. So they can never become hero, and it's not a real, they're just dead. But they are 15 gold, so they're super cheap, and they have access to their own goblin equipment. And we're going to talk about the squig prodder, the ball and chain, the madcap mushrooms in a second. We're not going to talk about that yet. Then you have cave squigs, which are 2d6 movement, weapon skill 4, strength 4, initiative 4. Basically, the dogs for them. With random movement, makes them interesting. And the Minder's rule, basically, if goblins are too far away to basically control them, they just do random movement instead, which is kind of fun. They don't have animosity, essentially, also. And orcs don't care about them as much for routing purposes, so they only count as half for routing tests, which is cool. And they can be very good. Weapon skill 4, strength 4, initiative 4, all good stats to have there. But it's like kind of like all the dogs or anything like that, or the wolves, basically. The troll, another big guy, 200 gold. Weapon skill 3 is rough, strength 5 is nice, toughness 4 is decent for a big guy. 3 wounds, 3 attacks. It's just like the Rat Ogre, though, except it's always stupid. It does have a regen save, which is kind of nice, and it's on a 4-up, so they're a bit harder to kill for the regen, I would argue, in my opinion. They can't gain XP, which sucks, and you have to have 15 gold upkeep every... So you have to pay 15 gold to also keep them around. And they do have a vomit attack that also just auto hits, and it's just a strength 5 hit. I don't like them. They're not good. They're not worth the cost. They're fun, don't get me wrong, and they'll look cool in your warband, but don't hire them. Like most big guys, don't hire them unless you have a lot of extra gold lying around. And in terms of special equipment, you have the Squig Potter, which makes the range of goblins from normally 6 to see if they go wild. If you're away from 6 of them, they go wild. But with this, it's 12 inches, and it's also a spear. This is pretty good. You'll probably want at least one goblin equipped with Squig Potter if you're using cave squigs, and you probably should be using both of them. The Madcap mushrooms essentially let you have frenzy, but also you have to have Madcap mushrooms if you want to use the ball and chain. The ball and chains are a bit of a gimmick or a meme, I would like to call them. Basically, you'll have random movement. They do hit hard. They do a lot of wounds. You don't get armor save, I think, against them. Yeah, you don't get armor saves. You're most likely wounding on 2s. You're -1 to hit, but the randomness chart makes them a little bit not great. And you have the potential, if you run into terrain, I believe, or anything like that, they just die on it. They go out of action if they hit terrain, which sucks. So that's kind of like the downside. I don't suggest ball and chain or mushroom unless you're doing it for the fun of it, because you can, and if you can afford them, basically. But I don't suggest them right off the bat, at least. You also have special skills for the orcs that they can get. So basically, they count as having a helmet for this one. You get extra charge range. You ignore fear with this. Reroll route tests. Add 1 to the armor save. Like, these are all pretty good. This is just, like, in my opinion, this is a better version of, like, the Dwarves and the Ostlanders, because, like, they both have 4 heroes, but these heroes are a little bit more survivable. You have, like, all these cheap, like, you have Goblin Warriors and Cave Squigs, which are super cheap and kind of make up for that fact that you kind of want them to get out of action instead of your guys. They're great support, basically. The Warband is super cheap for having toughness 4 all around. That being said, it's a worse version of Beastmen, in my opinion, and I think they belong either at the bottom of Dominant or at the top of Battle Hardened. And that's pretty good for a faction or a warband that only has 4 models or 4 heroes to start with. I've just seen them. This is a little bit of confirmation bias, but I've always seen them do at least decently or very well. This is a warband that's pretty terrifying. So yeah, that's all the warbands for basically 1A. Like I said before, we'll do a video for 1B, 1C. I don't think I want to do a video for 2A, 2B, especially 2B. This is super long. And 3, I'm not that interested in those. And eventually I would like to talk about the hired swords. And then if you guys want, I can also do videos on other topics from Mordheim. Like, I could make, like, starting lists for how I would play these factions and tips and everything. But I hope this video kind of covered my thoughts on these warbands. Which warbands are good, what warbands are not good, like Dwarves, basically. But at least in 1A, none of them are, like, super, super bad, which is nice in my opinion. You only have 2 real that do kind of suck. But yeah. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed and everything. And yeah, take care. See you in the next one.